Thank you everybody for joining us today. We're so excited to host you. Our team is going to get started in just a couple minutes, but if you are new to the room, please let us know where you're calling in from in the chat. Feel free to turn on your video if you would like to join us. If you're going to stay off video, we will let you know when we're going to do more of the workshop stuff of getting engaged with one another later. But please do share where you're calling in from. Let us know how you're doing. There's a cat on your head, Ryan. Yes, indeed. The mascot of today's session.
In true tech fashion, the cat's name is Pixel.
There you go.
We'll see how long he stays up there. He might end up taking a nap. So.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started introducing everybody today. Welcome. We're so excited to have you here. My name is Emma. I'm the Community and Volunteer Manager for Start Out. I am excited to welcome folks to participate in today's People and Culture event for Empathy 101. Start Out, Kevin, if you could move to the next slide. Start Out's mission is to focus on increasing the number, diversity, and impact of LGBTQ entrepreneurs and amplifying their stories to drive the economic empowerment of our community. We do this in a myriad of different ways, but mostly our reach focuses on contacting founders directly, giving them access to capital opportunities and programming such as this. Next slide. This is a small snapshot of some of our reach. We have a growth lab, which is an accelerator program where over 33 graduated companies have now raised over $107 million in funding. We have over 300 mentors at any given time that are all meeting with our entrepreneurs and founders one-on-one. We have a network of investors. We also have a very talented programming board that is currently devising events such as this and trying to find ways that our community of 17,000 members can connect with each other virtually and in person. Next slide. And then, of course, none of this would be possible without Start Out.
Oh.
This is just a quick moment to say thank you to our sponsors. Thank you for all of those who have given Start Out the support, without which none of this would be possible. And without further ado, I'd love to turn over today's session to your hosts, Kevin and Ryan. I'll allow you to introduce each other, and then we will get on with the program.
Thank you so much, Emma. Hello, everyone. Really excited to be in community with this incredible organization, all these amazing queer folks and allies coming together. We are part of a team, Ryan and I, from our startup called Jago. We are also part of Start Out, and I'm part of the People and Culture team, the committee, and we are putting this program together for y'all. I am the founder and CEO of Jago, as well as I am a IoT and tech product leader at T-Mobile. And Ryan is one of my co-founders. And Ryan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Ryan, he, him pronouns. I'm the empathy science lead at Jago. And yeah, just excited to bring a little bit of empathy knowledge and give us all an opportunity to practice some empathy skills with everyone today.
Awesome. So we're going to jump right in and go into the objectives so we all are aligned. Ryan.
Yeah, so we have kind of three main goals for our time together today. The first is to explore the concepts of empathy and the ideas of cultural lenses and vulnerability and their connection to all of the different businesses and other industries that you all are involved in. The second is to practice building our empathy skills, and we're going to do that through some small group story sharing. And then the third is to examine a case study of how empathy has been leveraged in creating the culture of a startup. And Kevin's going to do that by sharing some of the story of Jago. So our next slide is our agenda. We're going to do some quick introductions in the chat and set some norms up. We're then going to explore the concept of empathy and learn a little bit of empathy science. We're then going to do some small group story sharing, followed by the case study, and then we'll have a wrap up with some questions at the end. Next slide, please. So for introductions, because there are a number of us and we don't have, sadly, the time for everyone to go around one-on-one, what we'd like you to do is to just share what you feel comfortable with in the chat. You can share your name, your pronouns, and one thing that you hope to learn from today. And we appreciate that third part in particular because it really helps Kevin and I to adjust our workshops to make sure that you all are getting what you are hoping to get out of our time together. While you all are doing that, again, name, pronouns, and what you hope to get out of this, I'll start going through our norms on the next slide. So we have 6 quick norms. The first one is we ask that you be present. And by that, what we mostly mean is we ask that you give yourself the gift of these next 90 minutes together. So if you have your email open, we ask that you close it. If you have your phone within reach, we ask you to put it somewhere outside of your reach. Close down any messaging apps, anything that might be dinging you, and give yourself the gift of these 90 minutes to really focus in on and engage with what we're talking about. The second is we encourage you to ask questions, and there'll be times both throughout the presentation that you can do that. There'll also be, if you ever have any questions while we're talking about things, you can throw them into the chat. Also, if you don't feel comfortable sharing any of those messages or any of those questions, like in the group chat, you can individually message either Kevin or myself, and we'll read those anonymously and share those questions just in case anyone has a question that they don't want associated directly with them. The third is stories stay and lessons leave. So especially when we get into our small group storytelling opportunity, we want to emphasize that this is a safe space where the details of any stories or experiences that you share stay within this workshop, but the lessons that you take from what people share and what you learn go with you. Fourth is to share the airtime. And so this can be a little bit different depending on your personality. For extroverts like myself, that often means making sure that we're making space for other people and not dominating the conversation. For people who might be a little more reserved, this can mean pushing yourself a little bit and making sure that you get your perspective and your opinion in on the conversation that we're having. The fifth is to be open to new ideas. We're going to be talking about empathy, which is probably not a new idea to many of you, but some of the aspects of what we're talking about might be a little bit new. So be open to hearing some new ideas. And if these are ideas you've heard before, let those ideas sink a little bit deeper. And then the last is we ask that you aim for your growth zone. And so what do we mean by that? So this comes from my long background in environmental education. So we often think of kind of there being 3 zones that we engage in. There's our safe zone, right? It's things we feel very comfortable with. It's things we do all the time, things that are pretty standard for us. We then have our growth zone. This is something that's going to push us to maybe be a little bit more uncomfortable. It's going to push us to do something that's a little bit outside of that safe zone, but this is often where we see the growth that comes from learning new things and trying new things out. And then last, we have our danger zone. And this is when we're doing something that's so drastically outside of what we're comfortable with that we start to shut down and we start to not want to engage at all. So our goal today is to aim for that growth zone. We want to push ourselves a little bit, try something a little bit new, but if at any point you start to find yourself in your danger zone, we encourage you to do what you need to do for some self-care. That can be stepping away for a little bit. It can be just letting us know so that we can adjust and modify what we're doing, but we don't want anyone in the danger zone, but we do want to push ourselves to those growth zones.
Ryan,
Awesome.
we've got some awesome lessons people are looking for, and especially some folks that I am close to and truly love. Candice, hi. Amy, hello, welcome. Love you all, in fact, but I'm really excited to see you here as well. We've got some amazing things. Expressing empathy and authenticity through screens. I love that. I think that's going to be great during the breakout. Looking forward to new empathy listening best practices, learn what I can about engaging more proactively with empathy. Best practice for embedding empathy. I saw some really great lessons that we can focus on and align to what we're working towards. Learn how to apply empathy in my business. I think definitely that'll come into play. Communicating empathy through marketing. Oh, I love that one as well.
And this one about balancing empathy with self-care, also very, very important.
Yeah, and a quick shout out. Amy is a co-collaborator with me, and we do our weekly empathy power up on LinkedIn, and she's written a book called Empathy for Change. So if you want to learn more about empathy, get her book. Love it. It's one of my favorite books, so check it out. All right, so with that, let's continue with a little bit about So just to give you a level set, so what we believe in Jago, and we truly understand this. Sorry, my dog is being distracting. Paul, can you get tied in? Sorry. um, what we believe in is we all are trying to get to the goals of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are goals. We're trying to achieve those goals. And we believe at Jago that empathy is a key skill to achieve those goals. This is how we work to achieve them. And this is an important part of working towards those goals of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we want to make sure we understood the why behind the empathy. Why empathy is important. We truly believe that to create a world where people seek to understand one another, empathy needs to be a daily habit. When building a community like Start Out, it requires empathy. It requires understanding the different identities of different people, the different backgrounds that come towards it. And so it's really important for us to first understand the why behind empathy and what it achieves, the goal it achieves. And now let's just start understanding what empathy is. And Ryan?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different definitions of empathy, but the one that we focus around is the idea of empathy being an active process of putting oneself into the perspective world of another. And if you talk to different empathy experts, they'll put empathy into a variety of different buckets. Some people will say there's 3 or 4, sometimes more, but there are kind of 3 main buckets that we focus on. The first one is what's called cognitive empathy, or often considered thinking empathy. So this is the type of empathy where you see someone in a situation and you try to put yourself in their shoes, right? You try to think through, how do I think this person would is feeling in this situation, right? I apply my own thought process to it. The second one is affective or emotional empathy. And this is when we see someone in a situation and we actually feel how we would feel in that if we were that person in that situation. So it goes a little bit beyond just thinking through it and is actually feeling how the other person feels. The third one is compassion empathy. And this is sometimes considered to be kind of a subset of emotional empathy, but really what it means is that you not only feel how the other person feels, but you feel this drive to act, this drive to help. And that action can come in a variety of different ways. For many of us, that means going and relating our empathetic experience, right? Like, oh, I have an understanding, I think, of how you feel in the situation, and I'm here for you. I'm here to support you, right? I can understand what you're going through. So those are kind of our 3 main buckets. Next slide, please, Kevin. Oh, and as Amy said, the head, the heart, and the hand, which is a very, very nice way to summarize that. So why does empathy matter? Why did we start a company about it? Why are we spending time talking about it? And I'm going to preface this by saying that the kind of business case for empathy is, there's a business case to make for it. So things like increasing, employee engagement, increasing job satisfaction, increasing productivity, increasing retention. And there are a lot of studies that show that the more empathetic a workplace is, the more you can make a business case for it. But beyond just the business case, empathy is really at the core of what allows diverse teams to function more effectively. It helps teams to understand why there might be differences in perspectives and to work through those differences in productive conflict. So that when people are bringing different ideas and those ideas don't perfectly mesh together, they have the skill set to engage with each other, understand where those differences are coming from, and work towards a product that meshes all of those ideas together. So as we talked about, if the goal is diversity and equity and inclusion, and we understand that a more diverse workplace and a more equitable workplace leads to better products, leads to better engagement with different stakeholders that you're engaging with, or to the people that are engaging with your company, then empathy is really that foundational skill that allows people with different perspectives to come together and to work with each other. It helps to reduce prejudice, it helps to reduce bias, and it creates a more inclusive and innovative product and services. And the kind of big takeaway for all of this is that it just leaves your employees, it leaves your company more attuned to the needs and feelings of your clients, of the peers that you're working with, and of employees. And we can think, if we just think through, okay, having a manager, for example, who is able to understand where their employees are coming from, the people that they're managing are coming from, understanding when they're getting burnt out, understanding when they're not feeling valued. And that ability to understand that perspective means that then they can take actions to mitigate the negative consequences that can come from those. And we can just think through how that can have a lot of different positive benefits for a company that's involved. Next slide, please, Kevin. So I'm going to throw a big caveat out there, though. So when we think of empathy, empathy is often based on how we would feel in a situation or how we think. So if I go back to our types of empathy, cognitive empathy is me thinking, okay, how would I feel in that situation? Or emotional empathy is me projecting, how would I feel in that situation? The downside to that is that is a lot of us projecting our own perspective and how we would feel, right? So all of these things are influenced by what we call our cultural lens, right? It's the way in which we view the world. Some people will call this their positionality. But how we view the world is not exactly the same way as how someone else is going to view the world. And their experiences and their perspectives are going to potentially lead them to feel slightly differently when they're in that situation than we. So these lenses are built over our lives. They're based on where we grew up and who we've interacted with and the experiences that we've had and the culture that we've been exposed to and other cultures that we've been exposed to. And so one of the important things to keep in mind whenever we're talking about empathy is that we never want to assume that just because we would feel a certain way in a situation, just because our empathy is activating and we are feeling how we would feel in that situation, that the other person is feeling the same way. Because based on their cultural lens and their life experiences, they might be feeling something very different. So we want to just always go into any sort of empathetic situation being aware that we're bringing our own biases, we're bringing our own perspective into this, and we always want to double check with people on how they're actually experiencing things. So this isn't to say that we don't want to use empathy, we just want to be aware of one of the potential pitfalls of empathy, which is assuming that everyone's going to feel the same way that we feel in that situation. Awesome. Next slide, please, Kevin. So how do we build awareness of our cultural lenses and how do we build our empathy skills? So for our cultural lenses and understanding where our perspective is coming from, it really takes practice in mindfulness. It takes opportunities for you to reflect on the different ways that our identity and our experiences impact the way we view the world and how we interact with the world. The more aware that we can be of our own lens and the different ways that our experiences have shaped that lens, the more we can catch these unconscious biases and make them more conscious biases. Or even if they're not more conscious biases, the more we can create mental checks for ourselves and put those in place so that when situations come up where these biases might have a negative impact, we can prevent them. Let me give you an example. I come from a long background in the environmental field. And so I have a huge bias towards people that would identify themselves as conservationists or green people. And so if I was doing an interview for a job, I need to be aware of how my bias towards people that are, more inclined towards taking green actions is going to impact how I connect and view other people within that process, right? And again, because me being biased towards people who are pro-conservation isn't necessarily like a terrible bias. It's just a part of my identity, but I want to be aware of that because if that bias is getting in the way of me allowing people who maybe don't have those sorts of inclinations when it's something like a job that maybe has nothing to do with conservation, then that's going to have a negative impact on the people that I'm interviewing and narrow my pool and make for a less diverse organization. It also allows us to more easily understand why others might have different views. So when we think about our cultural lens, the reason I really like calling it a lens is because I like thinking of it like a pair of glasses. And I like thinking of the metaphor of the ability to swap out pairs of glasses and to put on other lenses from other people. And the more that we can practice trying to put on other lenses and trying to see situations from a different person's perspective, the more we can practice that skill and the easier it is for us to understand where another person might be coming from, or to catch ourselves when we're making an assumption about where they might be coming from. Next slide, please, Kevin. So all this builds into, okay, empathy is important. How do we build these empathy skills? So there's a lot of science. A lot of it, interestingly, comes out of the nursing profession and medical schools, where there has been a lot of recognition in the past 10 years that empathy is an important skill in the medical profession for the ability to engage with and understand where patients are coming from. And through all of that, they found a couple of different key skills that can help to build to your empathy. The first is having opportunity for perspective taking, particularly around people who have different different identities than themselves. And when I'm saying identities, I mean in all aspects of identity. It could be race or gender or sexual orientation or ableism or having a different having different cognitive abilities. So as many different perspectives as you can get exposed to, as many different dimensions of diversity as you can get exposed to, the more you can do that perspective taking, the better your empathy skills tend to be. They also found that pairing that perspective taking with reflection is really important. And that's probably not a huge surprise to anyone, because most learning is improved when we take time to do some reflection, right? When we take some time to really think about what this experience was and to integrate that a little bit further. So perspective taking paired with reflection, and then most importantly, working on it as a skill continuously. So we often, we call Jago a empathy gym, because empathy is a skill just like exercise. You don't just hire a personal trainer and then go 2 times and you've done your, you learned how to work out and then you're done and then you're all physically fit and everything is great. Just like every other skill, just like exercise, just like diet, empathy needs to be a daily practice. And that doesn't mean you need to do a ton of it every day. It's more about continuously practicing it over and over and building that habit over time. So we saw these 3 different pieces and we put them together and we thought, okay, what can we create, or what kind of activity would really help us to practice all of these things simultaneously? And we came up with listening to stories. Listening to stories encourages perspective taking, right? We're listening to someone share their experience, and we just innately as humans want to put ourselves into that perspective world of the other person. Listening to stories encourages reflection. As we listen to someone share a story, we often think, well, how would I feel in that situation? Or what I might do differently? Or why did they make the choice that they made? And listening to stories is also an innate part of being humans. There's a famous quote that the human mind is a story processor and not a logic processor. We are innately wired to receive information through stories more easily than almost any other medium. And so story sharing and listening to stories with reflection are really powerful ways to practice empathy skills. Next slide, please, Kevin. So one of the ways that this might seem a little bit different from some of the other ways we think about our DEI work and the kind of standards that we have seen in a lot of organizations goes as such. So one of the ways that we often see a lot of DEI work done is through these annual trainings, right? The downside to the annual trainings is that they're infrequent. They're usually once a year, or maybe you have them every couple of months. And a lot of the benefits that you see, a lot of the mindset shifts and a lot of the openness tends to fade after a couple of days. So again, going back to this idea of we want it to be more continuous and gradual and small things over time than a big training that happens once, because those benefits tend to not stick around very much. The second is we see a lot of employee resource groups, but one of the downsides to this is that oftentimes these are kind of siloed communities, right? They're groups that are kind of meeting by themselves, and unless they're really empowered by the organization, they often don't have a lot of leverage to shift things within the organization, especially if you're looking at how you can shift systems to make more equitable systems within your organization. And then the third is employee surveys. And employee surveys can be really useful, but they by themselves are just a way to gather information. They don't often lead to, unless you are going to follow through on leveraging that information to actually make some changes, especially on a more systematic level within your organization, employee surveys by themselves are just a tool. They're not going to shift towards any change. Next slide, please, Kevin. So what we're going to do is we're going to practice doing some story sharing and story listening. And before we do that, we want to really highlight another important skill and another important power that is going to be important as we go into these small breakout rooms. And that's the power of vulnerability. In order to be empathetic, in order to open yourself up to the experience of others, we need to be vulnerable. Empathy is based on connecting to other people and oftentimes feeling things with them. And so vulnerability is a prerequisite to that ability to connect with others. We need to be open to feeling what they're going to share with us before we can connect with them on an empathetic level. So as we go into this exercise, I'm going to go back to one of our norms about that growth zone and encourage you to lean into a little bit of discomfort that might come from sharing some of the experiences we're going to ask you to share. Aim for that growth zone. Again, You have complete control over what you'd like to share. So don't share something that's going to put you in your danger zone. Don't go into, don't push yourself so much that you're going to start to shut down, but think about something that is going to encourage you just a little bit outside of being super comfortable, and sharing something that pushes you to grow just a little bit. So here's our directions. Next slide, please, for the activity. We're going to put you in breakout rooms. We're going to ask that one person starts by sharing a short, less than 3-minute story with your group. And these groups are going to be about 3 people. Again, aim to share to the level of your growth zone. When one group member is sharing, and here's the hardest part of the directions, we want everyone else to just listen. We don't want you to ask questions, which we know is difficult because we are often socialized to think that asking questions is a way to show interest and engagement. We want you to just listen to the other person's story and try to understand their perspective, understand their experience. Once that person is shared, we ask you to thank them. And then we're going to have these series of 5 questions. And Kevin, if you can paste these questions into the chat so that everyone has access to them, that we want you to debrief with the person. So as a listener, we want you to share, how did your partner's story make you feel? And how do you think they felt when they were telling the story? Then we want the storyteller to share how they actually felt while they were sharing that experience with you. And then going back, listeners, how do you think they felt while they were living that experience, the experience that they were sharing with you? And then storytellers, how did you feel when you were sharing that experience? So I want you to note a couple things here. Note that we're encouraging listening to the story. We're encouraging perspective taking, trying to understand where the other person is coming from. But we're also encouraging immediate feedback, so that it's not just, oh, here's what I think. We're also getting feedback immediately from the storyteller on how they actually felt. And that back and forth is how we're really going to build that perspective taking ability. It's not just that you reflect on it, it's also that you're getting feedback on, were you close? You probably will be, but maybe they'll use a slightly different word or have a slightly different experience, and that will be an opportunity for you to learn from them and to learn how their perspective might be a little bit different. Once one person is shared, you can repeat this cycle with another person in your group. Ideally, you'll have time for all 3 people to share, but I do know that sometimes stories go a little bit long, and sometimes the debriefs also go a little bit long. So we'll give you a warning a couple of minutes before we're going to shut the groups down, so that you all have an opportunity to debrief them. If everyone in your group has had the opportunity to share, then you have an opportunity within your small groups to talk about your commonalities and to ask some of those follow-up questions. But again, we ask and encourage you to focus this time on listening and reflecting on these types of questions. Great question. Is there a prompt? Next slide, please, Kevin. There is a prompt. There are 3 different prompts you can choose from. Or if you have another story you'd like to experience, you can share those as well. You could talk about a time when you changed your mind about something or someone. You can talk about a time when change was hard, or you can share a time when you felt accomplished about something. So what we're going to do right now is I'd like everyone to spend just 2 minutes, look at these prompts, spend a little bit of time thinking about what story you might want to share, and take some notes on it. Take the notes now, because the one thing we don't want to do is that when someone else is sharing, you're still trying to stress out and figure out exactly what you want to share. So take the time now before we get into the groups to put down any ideas, any key thoughts you want to share. And then in 2 minutes, we'll put you into your groups and you can start sharing with each other.
And so just before we give you the couple minutes, I just wanted to cover a couple of important points. So there was 2 questions, Emma, in the chat. One for the recording and slides. I don't have the answer. So Emma, if you could answer those, that'd be great. Will the recording be available and the slides be available as part of that? The other thing, it might feel a little uncomfortable, like Ryan said, but this is the power. It is a powerful, we've done this exercise. We've done this version of this workshop at a big pharmaceutical company, global company. We've done this various places, and it's been one of the most powerful experiences. So we ask you to lean in, be vulnerable. The power of empathy. I sort of leaned into this and jumped into this world in 2020 more so. I used to practice it every day, but just went all in. And I feel like a superhero. So like in LinkedIn and everywhere, I call myself Captain Empathy, because I believe the power of empathy can help you become a superhero. So I encourage you to lean in and just really come in with a a mind of growth as well. So I'll put on some reflection music for y'all to think about some stories,
Yeah.
and then once we're ready, we'll come back in a couple of minutes, and then we'll get started.
Okay. For people who might have joined after we gave the directions, just to fill you in real quick, we're in just a little bit going to go into some breakout rooms to share some short 3-minute stories on one of the 3 prompts that are up here right now. So we'll give about another 30 seconds for people to reflect, then we're going to go into those rooms.
And if you need instructions, you can always send us in chat.
Okay, I'm going to open up the breakout rooms again. Start with one person sharing. Use the
Ryan, just want to give anyone have any questions before we go into the breakout room? Any moment, like any questions, any clarifications? Even from the content before, I know Ryan shared a lot of information, which if you have any questions, just wanted to give you that moment.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yes, great question. We encourage you to keep the video on. If you're uncomfortable, you can turn it off, but at least in the breakout room, it'll be nice to build that, especially if someone telling the story, it is an empathetic act for them to see you and see the other person. So we encourage you to keep the video on.
And especially since we don't let you ask questions, at least you can like nod your head, and your like facial expressions and things like that can be helpful to for people to feel like they're being listened to and followed along with.
And at any point, if you need the prompts again, or if you need the reflection, after the story is done and the reflection questions, they're in the chat, or you can send us in and we can paste it again if you don't see them in the breakout room. But really think about those questions and take a moment to have that feedback and reflection moment. It is an important part of this exercise.
Okay. We're gonna jump on into the room.